The last thing I wanted to hear when returning from work was my friend asking, "Hey Hamza, want to go on a hike?" "You got to be kidding me. Nope," I replied, setting my stuff on a table. "Come on, man, it's a Friday, and you're off for the next 2 days. That is precisely why I want some shut-eye right now." My friend, Osama, and I rented an apartment together in Islamabad, as it was near our workplace. "You can go with Jamshed," he said. He had no plans for the weekend, I said. "He has trouble going up the office staircase." "I doubt he would be eager for a hiking trip," replied Osama. "How about I make an offer? I will do the dishes and clean the flat for the next week." "How does that sound?" asked an enthusiastic Osama. The offer was not bad. "Fine, but we will only go halfway as it'll get dark in a few hours." "Sure, I'll go get packing. By the way, we're going to Trail 11 on the Margala Hills." "Bingo," replied Osama. About 45 minutes later, we reached the entrance to Trail 11. By this time, the sun had gotten lower, and its glow cast a red hue in the clouds. Several hikers were climbing down at this time. "Let's get going then. It'll probably get dark in an hour or so," I stated. Osama nodded in agreement, and we started our ascent. As we made our way up, I couldn't help but notice that we were the only ones going up. Everyone else was descending from the hills. It made sense, as it was not recommended to hike in the dark, as visibility gets poor and you are more prone to injury. That excludes the fact that wildlife gets more active at night. There were a few reports of leopard sightings in the area. However, that was about it. 40 minutes into the hike, we reached a clearing where a small stream flowed from the adjacent hills and crossed the path in front of us. "We should head back now. The sun is getting low, and it'll be dark in a few minutes," I said. "Just a little further," pleaded Osama. "Why, we have reached the halfway point." "I know, but just a little further." "Fine," I sighed. We climbed a little further, with Osama guiding the way. We slowly took out our flashlights as it had gotten dark. "Osama, it's too dark now. Let's turn back," I said. "I see it," exclaimed Osama as he darted towards a row of trees. Once I caught up, Osama showed me the reason for the hike. In his hands, he held jacaranda flowers, which he just plucked from the trees. "So, there's this girl in my office who just joined. I really found her cute and found out she loves the color purple. I remember seeing these flowers the last time I hiked here and thought this would be the perfect gift for her." "That is so you, my friend," I said as I gave him a playful shove. "If Romeo is finished, can we please head back now?" "Yup, I have got what I wanted." With that, we started descending the hills. Pretty quickly, I saw the stream which we had passed earlier. Suddenly, Osama caught my shoulder. "What's wrong? You need more flowers now?" I asked, looking back at Osama. However, his expression was serious. He pointed towards the far end of the stream, just as it flowed downstream. "Look." I followed his finger and was surprised to see a person standing at the edge of the stream there. Under the faint moonlight, it looked like a woman who was wearing an abaya, covered head to toe in a black gown. Her face was turned in the other direction, so I couldn't see it. "What's she doing out here all alone at this time? She must have lost her way." "Let's go help her," I said as I tried to move forward, but Osama's grip tightened on my shoulder. "I don't know. Man, it's dark right now, and we are alone on these hills, which are usually deserted at this time. We shouldn't interfere with her," stated Osama as he gulped. It sank in what Osama was implying. "You think that's not a human? All I'm saying is we should just quickly leave." I looked back at the woman. She was now walking along the edge of the stream. "Yeah, let's not interfere." We quietly moved towards the stream. As we reached the edge, the woman started walking in the water. However, her steps didn't create any ripples in the water. It was then I noticed that she wasn't walking through the stream. She was levitating on top of the surface. I quickly took out my phone and started taking pictures. No one was going to believe me if I didn't have any evidence. I looked at Osama, his gaze transfixed on the woman. Our steps will make noise if we step into the water, I whispered to him. We will have to move quietly then, he said. I cautiously took a step in the water. The water was cool and only reached up to my ankles. Let's move, I said. With each step we took, our eyes were fixed on the woman. Once we were halfway through, the woman sat down on the water. We both froze. Osama took out his phone to take a picture. However, he had his flash on. Once he clicked on the capture button, light flashed from his phone. Osama hurriedly covered the flash with his hand, but it was too late. The woman instantly turned her head towards us. Her eyes were completely white and shone under the moonlight. I was horrified at what I saw. The woman slowly got up and took a step towards us. Leave. Her deep voice echoed in my ears. I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed Osama's arm, who was frozen in fear, and then sprinted. I don't think I have run this fast in my life. I never looked back as I ran, and neither did Osama. The way down wasn't too rocky, and thus made our descent easier. We reached the bottom of the trail quickly. None of us said a word to the other and darted towards the car. As soon as we were in, I locked the doors. What the hell was that? Shouted Osama. I have no idea, but I think that was definitely not a human, I said, shivering at that thought. Osama took out his phone. Let's see the pictures we got. People will definitely believe us when they see these. He quickly opened his phone's gallery and paused. What's wrong? I asked as I leaned in to look at his phone. There's nothing there, he said in a quiet voice. I looked as he showed me the photo. He had captured the stream clearly. However, there was no woman in the picture. I took out my phone and went through the pictures I took. Sure enough, not a single picture. My friend Kieran and I often travel together for weeks at a time. He is the best travel companion and my little brother from another mother. We love visiting the same places. We are both easygoing, accommodating, and adventurous, with a keen sense of each other's needs. It was not unusual for us to be set up together in an Airbnb in Berlin. We both speak fluent German and, while we usually stay in Friedrichshain, the neighborhood we are most familiar with, this time we couldn't find anything to our liking and decided to stay in an unusually posh apartment building in West Berlin. I had an inexplicable feeling of unease when I first entered the apartment on my own. It was in a clean, quiet, and new apartment complex clearly intended for wealthy inhabitants, completely unlike the East Berlin Soviet-style flats we were so accustomed to. Security was tight. I needed a key to enter the complex, a second key to activate the lift, a third key to open the door to our hall, which included 3 other apartments, and finally, a fourth key for our apartment door itself. A last detail, which is relevant to what was about to transpire for poor Kieran and I, is that apartment dwellers are able to buzz in visitors and delivery drivers from the very front of the complex. Written on the wall, their last names, for example Shepard and Wokenstein. However, because of the layers of security, they will have to meet the visitor or driver downstairs, outside the lift. And yet something was off about the apartment building. It was embellished with odd details like a row of laughing Venetian masks framed on the walls that you had to walk past on the way to the lift. If you peered behind the pillars on the ground floor, you would see sculptures of demonic figures from folklore of unknown origin. And right in front of the entrance to our maze-like hall, which was decorated with floor-length mirrors all the way so that you could not escape the sight of yourself, was a marble statue of a heavily pregnant woman with no head. Around me was dead silence, no sounds of children playing or adults arguing. More than a little unsettling. Maybe tacky, most definitely. As Kieran finally arrived by train from Switzerland, I greeted him downstairs, and sensitive as he was, I knew he was also somewhat uncomfortable with the decor. We tried our best to lighten the mood. Cultural appropriation? Kieran declared archly, pointing at the statues, which hadn't escaped his notice. Since it was our first night together this summer, Kieran and I had much to catch up on. We wandered around the neighborhood to obtain our bearings. It seemed charming and safe enough, if run down and shabby in a way I didn't associate at all with West Berlin. Lots of buildings appeared abandoned and shops permanently shut. I snapped monochrome photos with my new camera, and soon we were drinking beers outdoors with mediocre pasta, without a care in the world. By the time we returned to our apartment for the night, still in a state of drunken revelry albeit a touch more subdued, it was nearly midnight. Kieran got us in, successfully, with all 4 keys. We sobered up and sat around the dining room table, turning to more serious matters. I should note that we were speaking at a regular volume, the tone of an intimate late-night conversation between old friends, with the knowledge that the walls were very thick, for we had not heard a peep from the neighbors who shared our corridor all day. That is, if they even existed, the only thing we could be reasonably faulted for, perhaps, was the occasional uncontrollable belly laugh. 15 minutes past midnight, we were startled by the sound of the doorbell. I am not sure how normal this is, but for both Kieran and I, we believe you should be very careful about who you open the door to late at night, much less if you're in an unfamiliar and eerie building. We practically jumped out of our chairs and padded hesitantly to the door to examine the unexpected visitor, only to realize that the front door had a bizarre design flaw. There was no peephole through which we could see who had chosen to ring our doorbell at this hour. In all my years of travel, I had never encountered a front door like that before. Moreover, due to how the visitor system was set up, we couldn't be sure if somebody was ringing from the outside of the complex or outside our front door. While we stared at each other, wondering what to do, the doorbell rang again. I have to admit that my heart was racing, as innocent and possibly justified as the ring may have been. Kieran got on his knees and tried to look under the door to see if he could make out the shoes of the person, but the narrow gap between the door and the carpet was so minuscule that all Kieran could observe was that the hall light had been switched on. There was no doubt that we had a stranger standing outside the front door. As if to remind us of this, the doorbell rang once more. Kieran and I moved silently to a corner of the living room and whispered to each other. "Is that a noise complaint, do you think?" I asked. Kieran shook his head firmly, and I could see that he was quivering slightly. "We weren't being loud at all," he said, "and besides, Germans are direct about this kind of thing. If we woke someone up, they'd pound on our door and yell 'Sei ruhig' or something." There was something very discomforting about the 3 purposeful rings, and how they were spaced apart, accompanied with nothing but dead silence. We waited a good 10 minutes, until we were fairly certain that the mysterious night caller had gone away. Kieran plucked up the guts to look under the door again. This time, the corridor was pitch dark. Nobody was there. We didn't dare to open the door, but I made sure it was double bolted from the inside. As our adrenaline wore off, Kieran and I decided that we should probably write off the incident and mistake, and start getting ready for bed, for we had plans to meet a friend at Cafe UNC early in the afternoon. We began to unpack our things and get settled in, and things began to feel normal enough, although we spoke only in hushed voices. It was most likely a noise complaint, I thought, but the neighbor had clearly given up rousing an apology from us, and was probably already fast asleep, not caring how bothered they had made us. Nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. By this time, it was easily 1:30. I was getting ready to brush my teeth, and Kieran had gotten comfortable in the fold-out bed, when the doorbell rang for the 4th time. We instantly froze, a 5th time, and a 6th time. The visitor was getting impatient, it seemed. Kieran stealthily edged towards the door and knelt to examine the hall light, pitch darkness once again. And then, abruptly, there began a series of knocks. The knocking was firm, gentle, and consistent in its rhythm. The fact there was no overt hostility somehow made it worse. "Do we open the door?" Kieran asked hoarsely. I shook my head. "I can understand the first 3 rings. But if they came back after an hour, and they're standing in the dark, knocking for us to answer, were not dealing with any regular noise complaint, or person, for that matter. The knocking, thankfully, came to an end, but Kieran and I were so spooked that we found it hard to settle down again. Whatever it was, I felt deep in my heart that our minor ordeal was not yet over. I tried my best to think, given the extraordinarily tight security of the building. In order to even access our doorway, the person would have to be one of our immediate neighbors. That would make sense if we had been speaking too loudly. But why would they return an hour later while standing in the dark, especially given our unwillingness to answer? Plus, Kieran and I had already switched off the lights in the living room and kitchen, and to anyone looking into the apartment, we might as well have been asleep. From our balcony, Kieran and I could look into the windows of the apartments that shared the same hallway to see if anyone was awake. What if the unexpected guest were a lonely insomniac searching for someone to speak to at night? We loved Berlin for its harmless weirdos. After all, we didn't want to alert anyone who could be watching by opening the glass door to the balcony and stepping out. So, we climbed out of the half-bathroom window and crouched on the balcony to look. In those other units, however, it was darkness and silence all the way down. We laid still in wait to see if we could sense any movement. Kieran was utterly convinced that someone, likely the unwanted stranger, on the ground floor, was using their phone. Indeed, from where we were hiding, I could make out a bright little rectangular screen on the ground floor, and nothing more. Was someone texting, Googling ways to break in? If there was a shadowy figure holding up their phone, they had to be standing very still. I began to smile. It's a keypad, I murmured. There isn't anybody there at all, not a soul. We can check this in the morning. It took considerable persuasion for Kieran to agree to climb back inside with me. He kept swearing that he could see fingers swiftly tapping away at the little screen. I was afraid he would spend all night watching for suspicious activity, but I managed to calm him down. It was past 2 a.m. by this stage. Kieran collapsed back into his bed and drew the covers up to his chin, looking very pale. Knowing how anxious Kieran could be, I knelt by his bed and whispered to him soothingly, "They aren't coming back at this hour. The door is bolted, and if they do, we'll shout something rude in German. They'll yell back, and then we'll figure out who they are and what they want from us." Kieran nodded and closed his eyes, breathing deeply. I sat by him for a moment longer, but the episode, as I had guessed, was not yet over. We heard the now dreaded sound of the doorbell ringing and grabbed each other instinctively. This time, it rang 3 more times in a row with the same deliberate pace. Kieran sprang out of bed immediately and looked under the door. No hallway light. "Please don't knock," I prayed, as I confirmed the number for the police and texted my husband what was happening to Kieran and I if we're stabbed by Norman Bates tonight. "Know that I love you," I wrote. My husband called me immediately out of concern. Kieran and I stepped into my bedroom so that the night visitor wouldn't hear us all speaking. After hearing the details, my husband tried to come up with harmless theories. Could a delivery driver have gotten lost in the building? He asked. I couldn't rule out the possibility, but Kieran and I both thought it was extremely unlikely. We hadn't seen any sign of a walled vehicle outside on our way back in, and while the building layout was confusing, the person had navigated it well enough to come back twice, in the dark, no less. Moreover, the lift was located directly outside of the hallway door. There was no missing it. Kieran's best attempt at a reconstruction, which my husband and I agreed with, was that one of our neighbors had hosted a party to watch the Euros match that night and continued to invite other people over in its aftermath. Kieran and I remembered we had shut the hallway door behind us very carefully, and because of the lock on it, the party host had to have been one of our immediate boy. Never had any girlfriends, not many friends either. I was an only child who spent all my time clinging to my mother. I didn't have a dad, but my mom made up for it. When she wasn't working, she spent all of her time with me, taking me to the movies, playing video games together. She was my entire world, the only person I needed. Unfortunately for me, this piece would all come crashing down. In my early 20s, my mom started getting sick. I tried so hard to take care of her and prayed every single day. But things only got worse, and the cancer would quickly take her life. Now without hope and all alone, I spiraled into a deep depression. House notes, bills, it all rested on my shoulders now. It was safe to say that I was a deer in the headlights. I had no social skills and no relatives who were willing to help. Before I knew it, I was living in a house with no lights or running water. I was in the worst situation of my life and ended up in a dark place. To keep from falling into drugs or something even worse, I had to leave. One day, I packed up my car and didn't look back. I drove for what seemed like forever, seeing more of the world than I ever had before. I met all sorts of people during my travels. Some freaks, but others pretty cool. Literally everything was a new experience for someone who had been sheltered all of his life. But oddly enough, I didn't feel afraid at all. I did miss my dear mother. But there was a feeling of freedom with this new life, until one day, something happened that forced me to consider finding a more traditional home. The story I'm about to share is one that most probably won't believe. But I know what happened, and it will stick with me for the rest of my days. It all started around midnight on a lonely country road. There was nothing but cow fields and old barns as far as the eye could see. I was trying to make it to the next town before calling it a night, but I had been driving all day and was getting pretty tired. Seeing as how I didn't want to wreck my only home, I decided it was time to pull over. I parked on the outskirts of one of the large cow fields. It was a clear night with stars filling the sky, so I figured it would be nice to break out my tarp and enjoy the view. After setting up, I sat down and opened up a bag of chips. In moments like this, I always found myself thinking of my mother. I missed the times we shared together, which is why I had to leave. I didn't really know what life had in store, but there was no going back. I couldn't stomach having to live alone in that empty house. Over time, my eyes started to get heavy. I turned on my side ready to get some shut-eye, hoping an angry farmer wouldn't greet me with a shotgun the next morning. As I did, the most peculiar thing happened. What seemed like a ball of fire or some sort of meteor whizzed by. Thinking it was a shooting star, I paid it no mind. I would attempt to nod off, but that proved impossible, as the nearby woods gave off an ominous orange glow. My first thought was that this could be a forest fire. But as I rose to my feet, a loud whirring sound filled the air, to the point that I started having strong headaches. I limped back to my car writhing in pain, prepared to call for help. While trying to dig for my phone, I heard a strange thud from behind me, sort of like footsteps from a very large person. I turned to see whom, or what was behind me. That's when I saw it. A giant creature about 7 or 8 feet tall in stature crept towards me. It seemed to be in some sort of metallic suit, giving off the same glow from before. The being wore an astronaut-like helmet that hid its facial features. It tried reaching for me with a slender and wrinkled arm. I instantly screamed and locked myself inside my car. Tears started to swell as I feared for my life. Never before had I seen something so horrifying. It was obvious this being was not of our world. I grabbed a knife from my glove box and clutched it tightly. Not that it could stand up to a literal freaking monster. The next thing I knew, its bony 3-fingered hand was pressed against my window. I was certain that the being would have no trouble shattering the glass. Quickly I crawled onto the back floorboard and started to pray. I just lost my mother a few months ago, and now a monster was trying to kill me. What did it want? And was my life seriously about to end here? All these things swirled through my mind, until I heard a voice, one that came from within my own head, speaking in a very kind tone. Do not fear human, for I've come to you with an offer. Come with us and learn all there is. See sights that no other human could fathom. When you return, eternal knowledge will belong to you and you alone. I understood the words clearly, but my fear overpowered everything else. Before giving the offer any thought, I yelled to the top of my lungs, "No, Rue, just leave me alone, go away." Following my outburst, everything went silent. Save for my nervous breathing I tried so desperately to hide. It seemed like an eternity had passed and I didn't hear anything, so reluctantly, I peered from the window to check my surroundings. I was relieved to see that this horrifying entity was no longer there. I glanced to my left then the right. It was really gone. Naturally, I rushed into my front seat and started the engine. Before pulling off, I saw a large glowing object rise up from the trees. It was cigar-shaped and gave off the same loud humming sound from earlier. Even though I was terrified, I found myself transfixed by this once-in-a-lifetime moment. Before I knew it, the craft shot up into the air faster than I could blink. Afterwards, I peeled out of the field and kept driving until I found civilization. This was truly a harrowing experience for me, one that truly changed my outlook. Never had I believed in the supernatural or aliens, but my experience was all too real. I ended up keeping this story to myself for the longest. After all, a homeless guy who saw an alien probably wouldn't sound good. I ended up finding myself a job and an apartment, no longer interested in the nomadic lifestyle. Presently, I've even started dating a beautiful waitress. Even though my life is pretty normal, I still have strange moments. Every once in a while, whenever I'm alone, I feel as if I can still hear the creature calling out to me, telling me that they're still watching and haven't forgotten me. But for the sake of normalcy, I try to ignore it. I often wonder what would have happened if I went with them. Was it a trap to hurt me? Or would they have really shown me all these amazing things? I guess it doesn't matter now, but I'll never forget my close encounter on that dreary farmstead.